Hello there, it's just David again here with a sort of reflection for this week. So I think maybe it was last week, maybe it wasn't, a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember. I was thinking about memory. Ironically, yeah, I can't remember when it was. And how important it is. Now, this week, I'm going to talk a little bit about harvest because it's Harvest this Sunday, and it's that time of year that most of our churches will be thinking about harvest. And first of all, say thank you to all those who've decorated all our churches. They've all looked wonderful, and they've all reflected the beauty of harvest. The reason I remember memory is it's one of those times where if you're not careful, you can kind of forget what you've done. It's a bit like sort of Christmas and Easter. You think you've got a great idea for a sermon or a talk or an assembly or something, and you do it, and then people say, "Oh, I remember that you did that before." And yes, I'm now. This is my 11th harvest at Welling, and I do remember my first one because it was just after I arrived, and it's one that I've sort of daren't repeat, but it's quite a good one. So the first one, for those of you who weren't around 10 years ago, was the flying pizza. And it's a good one because it's basically what you do is you take a pizza base, you can kind of do this sort of live, and it works as a children's talk or assembly, or for grown-ups, it all works the same. I'm not going to do it this year in Harvest, maybe next year. And you take a pizza base and then you build up a pizza, and you start with kind of normal things. So some tomatoes, it's quite normal, and you might put some onions on it and some cheese. There we go. And then you can kind of do more exotic things. Then you start putting silly things on like bananas. So you've got all your ingredients and you put them on your pizza base. But then you think a bit about it and you start saying, well, where do these come from? Very often, obviously, not quite sure where this banana came from, but it'll tell you on the ingredients list or something where it came from. Well, British cheddar cheese, so not that far away, cheddar, near where my father lives. Banana might be somewhere in the Caribbean, and then produce of Italy. So there we are. And you can teach a bit of geography. You can get people to think about how far, where those places are and how far they are away. And then you can teach a bit of maths as well, because you get them to add up the miles. So again, you're thinking about air miles. You're thinking, well, how far did each of those come? So to make the pizza, and so you can probably get up to about 10 ingredients or so, and you pile them on the pizza, and then sort of add up all the miles. So it can be a way of, as I say, teaching a bit of geography, a bit of maths, but also being aware of food miles and how they add up and how easily they add up, particularly for food which has multiple ingredients, and where all those ingredients come from. And of course, at the end of it, you've got quite a disgusting pizza. And then, particularly if you're dealing with young people or indeed anybody, and you say, right, who wants to come and eat my pizza? Allergies notwithstanding, of course. And well, generally nobody does, but there's always somebody who'll give it a go and try a slice. And it's a good, I think, message because, as I say, it makes people think about food and where it comes from, particularly the distances it comes from. Now, I'm saying that not just because I sort of ran out of ideas, but it did make me think, because there is something specific, and I'll mention it in Sunday morning's talk, which should be slightly different. But I think there's one thing in this sort of COVID-19 year in Harvest that I want to think about in particular. I mean, it's something I often say, but I think it's particularly relevant, and I think we've particularly had it brought home to us this year. And that is that, the danger is we can be a bit sentimental about harvest. We can sort of imagine, particularly in Hertfordshire, where we live in fairly picturesque villages, and we're surrounded by fields with their crops, etc., that we are gathering our harvest into our village, and still most people work on the land, and most of our food comes from the fields that we see round about us. Now, of course, we know the way, and I'm not criticizing it, but of course that's just not true. I mean, I don't know what the percentage is, probably what 2, 3, 4, 5% of people locally work in agriculture, or at least in primary agriculture, and most of those cash crops go elsewhere. Some of them may trickle back here, but we're not particularly gathering the harvest in to sort of feed the local villagers. And most of the stuff that we buy in the supermarket will come from all around the world. These are global markets. As I say, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it does stop us being a bit too sentimental about harvest. But I think then what COVID has brought home to us is that kind of from those crops being produced to stuff arriving at our door, particularly stuff arriving at our door perhaps when we can't go shopping because we're in lockdown or we're shielding or whatever, actually then what happens in that gap and who's involved in it, how vital they are, and sometimes, frankly, what we're always thinking about, what a raw deal they get. So, I mean, obviously we're thinking of farmers and giving thanks for the food that they produce. But then we're thinking of those who transport it, those who process it, those who package it, those who deliver it to supermarkets, those who kind of, work in distribution centres, etc., those who put it on the shelves, and increasingly those who then pick it for home delivery, and then those who make the sort of the home deliveries at the end of it, which for some people, perhaps many more people in this time of COVID, has become increasingly important. And a lot of those people in that sort of huge chain of process, aren't terribly well paid. I mean, a lot of them are sort of gig economy, 0 hours. Most of those jobs are not, terribly well paid jobs. So we think about them, but also we think about the fact that it's quite fragile. We're in this kind of, it's very efficient, our supply systems, these just-in-time supply systems. They're incredibly efficient because you're not storing stuff for a lot amount of time in big warehouses and stuff. But those just-in-time delivery systems mean that it's pretty fragile. It doesn't take much, as we've seen, for shelves to be cleared and things to disappear, and that has to be recalibrated. And it struck me very early on in the process, hearing somebody on the radio who really knew about these things saying, actually, please don't panic buy, because actually the great thing about these just-in-time delivery systems is, give us 2 or 3 days, and we can meet the demand, as long as you don't sort of buy all the toilet roll in the first 24 hours. So I think, that whole process of the way this global industry that produces our food works has come much more to the fore because of COVID. So I think this harvest, we need to say thank you to farmers, those working in primary agriculture, and we need to rejoice at the beauty of what's around us and appreciate those who are locally working in farming. But I think we need to also just, if we are going to be thoughtful about these things, just be realistic. Think, well, where does our food come from? And, how many extraordinary people are involved in getting it from wherever it's kind of taken out of the ground or whatever until it arrives on our doorstep. What is that huge long train of process that I've just kind of outlined? And, how are each of those people rewarded? And maybe we ought to look, increasingly and say, are those people properly rewarded? Or are there things we need to do to make the system a little bit fair and a little bit more thankful? Because, we've had it brought home to us again that, without them and without their sort of hard work and the way, as I say, these incredibly complex systems of distribution delivery, without them, we would be in a lot more trouble than we are. So we thank them and think about them, and think also sometimes about how we might give them a better deal. Thank you. God bless.